Let the pretentious title sequence begin.
Welcome, Gothamites, to another episode of the Arkham Sessions. My name is Brian Ward. With me, as always, the psychologist to the superheroes, superheroines, and supervillains of Gotham City and now Doom Manor, Dr. Andrea Letamendi. Hey, Andrea.
Hi, Brian.
This is our second episode of Doom Patrol, now that we've moved over into a brand new series. I have to tell you, we have gotten a fantastic response to our first episode of Doom Patrol, which we put out 2 weeks ago. A lot of people enjoying this show, a lot of people enjoying the fact that we have come in to do this show. And I've got to say, I'm even humbled that at least 3 different people have told us they got the DC Universe app just so that they could see the show and watch along as we covered it. So,
not a sponsor of our show.
Not a sponsor at all.
But we will freely advertise.
Sure.
Brian, are you enjoying Doom Patrol?
I am enjoying Doom Patrol, even more maybe this second time around. I'm seeing things that I didn't necessarily see before because I wasn't necessarily looking for them before. But now that we are sitting there and critically analyzing each of the characters, I'm enjoying it a lot. Are you?
I love it. There are a couple things. It's a mature show, so there are elements of the show that I think are sophisticated and particularly deep. Not that the other content we had before wasn't.
Right.
Certainly we could talk about a lot of mature ideas and concepts, but the show is it's dark, it's deep, and I think also what I enjoy about it is that there are a lot of elements that we don't know enough about. There are some stories that have yet to be further developed. They haven't unfolded. There's a sense of, I guess it's not complete yet. So unlike shows that we've done before where we can get to the end of the show and have a solution or maybe like a takeaway.
Yeah.
This is a little different because the story continues, and
it's
so
serialized.
Yeah. So there's a lot that people have questions about. There are a lot of places that there's sort of it's open-ended, and I think that's fun for us because we can form theories and conjecture and then hopefully return to some of the original thoughts that we had.
Yeah, I'm excited about diving in. We should go ahead and do that. This second episode is called Donkey Patrol, which goes into that thing that you desperately wanted to talk about last episode, Drea, the jackass.
Mm-hmm. The actual jackass.
The actual jackass. We should say that at the end of the pilot episode, the team all goes back into town after having been traumatized there earlier, and they discover that a donkey is just standing in the middle of the street. It's a rather flatulent donkey, and that flatulence opens up a portal that sucks in everybody and everything in the town, basically laying waste to the entire place, including the bus that has the good chief and Mr. Nobody, our villain / narrator. And then Crazy Jane takes it upon herself to walk into the portal and follow the chief against the wishes of her good friends, particularly Robot Man. Mm-hmm. So we have now lost 2 members of the team to this mysterious portal opened up by the jackass. That leads us to an opportunity to talk about a couple of characters. The first of which is Crazy Jane. Drea, we had been introduced to Crazy Jane a little bit in that previous episode, but leading up to Doom Patrol, how much, if anything, did you know about this character?
I only knew a little bit. I understood that she had many personalities, but what I wasn't familiar with was the powers that her different personalities possess.
Yeah. Crazy Jane first appeared in 1989 in an issue of Doom Patrol. So at least we're sticking within the same group, unlike another character that we will talk about here coming up. But she was created by Grant Morrison, who was the writer, and Richard Case was the artist. And basically, she is someone with what we learn in this incarnation of Crazy Jane in this series. She has 64 individual personalities. Now, this is a little bit different than what we've talked about in the past with dissociative identity disorder, where it may or may not be a thing. She is a metahuman. She genuinely has 64 individual personalities, each one with their own powers.
Right. There's no, so previously when we've talked about this mental illness, which used to be called multiple personality disorder and now is called dissociative identity disorder, or DID, we have offered some explanation of why the condition or the presentation of these symptoms is really hard to measure, really hard to kind of find evidence for, and that often there are other explanations, other clinical diagnostic explanations for the characteristics that one might have,
right,
or one might claim to have if they associate with DID. And when we've talked in the show before about it, we've sort of left it off as it's controversial, it's particularly rare, and the likelihood that another disorder is more is a better explanation for that clinical presentation.
Yeah.
That seems to be where we would fall. Here, it is almost like that movie Split, where we are seeing a defined, separate, distinct personalities that have their own individual powers. Yeah.
Now, interestingly, people would often say that they gained their alters via usually traumatic events. That's sort of the story that a lot of people have, right? Is that some sort of trauma fractured their identity and created different personas. That could be the case for Crazy Jane in her original, her origin story. When she was created, she actually was a character who had undergone a series of traumas, and I will go ahead and say they were sexual traumas. She was molested by her father. She was raped in a church on Easter Sunday, and and that's two different occasions. That's not her father, and she was like her original. Would you call it a dominant persona?
Yeah,
like
you would say like the primary
Yeah.
personality.
So her name was Kay, and then she was molested by her father. She sort of hid within herself and was replaced by Miranda, and Miranda sort of became the dominant character persona. Then she underwent a rape in a church. And she was
As Miranda?
Yes, I think I remember.
And this comes from this is still from the comics.
Correct. These are the comics. So you could say up to that point, she may or may not be going through all the different things that we experience as humans with dissociative identity disorder. But then she is struck by a gene bomb.
I'm sorry, what?
A gene bomb. Aliens are involved, and it splits her entirely into 64 personalities, giving them all powers and
Internally.
Correct. Yeah. So and we get to see that she does, in fact, no, we don't get to see her origin story in this episode of Doom Patrol. We do get to see there is a great scene where Robot Man, who is connecting with her on a deep level, or at least trying to. He's kind of replacing his daughter, who he thinks is dead, and by all accounts, we think she's dead too. He is trying to replace his daughter with Crazy Jane. So he's trying to connect to her.
There's something in their dynamic. There's certainly with Crazy Jane, she's not only a younger female person, but she's also, there are some characteristics with a lot of her personalities, or among a lot of her personalities, that are youthful, right? So, so being impatient, having low tolerance for distress, having outbursts and tantrums, lashing out, calling him names, like even some of her aggressive behaviors are actually kind of immature. She doesn't have control of her emotions. And
we even meet Baby Doll, who is genuinely a little girl.
So her persona called Baby Doll is inwardly and outward. She even sort of wears like clothing and puts her hair in pigtails, and she affects a voice that is this really young girl. And I wondered, I don't know if that's in the comics at all, but I wondered if this is our version of Baby Doll.
Baby Doll.
The at least maybe a reference of a DC character, Baby Doll, who is an adult person, but trapped in a young girl's body. And here it's almost like the opposite, like a young girl's personality trapped in a fully mature adult woman's body. But to get to your point, there's something about Crazy Jane that is youthful, somewhat immature, but also somewhat in development. Like she's still learning. It's like she needs a mentor. She needs somebody to take care of her, to look after her. And of course, Robot Man believed that he lost his daughter and felt that he had disappointed her, felt that he had not been a good father, even while he was like before the accident, felt like he had made many mistakes. He learns that through Crazy Jane that his daughter potentially is still alive.
Yes.
And so that connection brings him a level of hope. But then there's this, I can't tell if it's healthy yet, but there's this attachment he's formed with Jane where he does want to console her. He wants to guide her and almost to, I even want to say like to parent her in many ways. And there isn't anyone in the house, because the chief's gone. There isn't anyone in the house who is taking on this role. So it works. But there are some clear connections with both of them, that there's something missing psychologically, and they're both trying to fulfill that in this way.
And she did reach out to him at the, in the first episode as well. She sort of reached out for that connection a little bit. At least one of her personalities likes Cliff and wants to befriend him, and even maybe sees him as that mentor figure to some degree, which confuses him because every time she changes, and there's a visible change, there's a shimmer over her every time she changes her character, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of control over which character steps into the spotlight. If you're going to bring up Split. It's really interesting watching their dynamic, because she goes against much of Cliff, and toward the end of that episode, she reveals to him that his daughter is still alive, that she was the sole survivor of this accident. And he's almost decided to replace his daughter out of shame, out of guilt, out of embarrassment of being this rusty metal monster who is responsible for the death of her mother, is responsible for the death of himself, for all intents and purposes. And here you've got Jane, who doesn't see him as a monster, at least no more than she is. She accepts him for who he is. And so it's like, okay, well, this is an easy surrogate for his daughter. And like you said, it may or may not be healthy. We're not sure yet. We do know that when she jumps into the portal, he has decided that he does not want her to go. So he's still looking out for her and is desperately trying to figure out how to go about rescuing her. That's not necessary. Toward the beginning of this episode, we learn that the donkey is a portal. And that portal spits out Crazy Jane in front of a new character that we get to meet, Cyborg. Now, most people would know Cyborg from Teen Titans, from
Justice League.
But we were given him in this show, which is interesting because I don't remember an incarnation of Doom Patrol that ever had Cyborg. But he fits. Mm-hmm. His story fits. The trauma fits. Were you ever like a Teen Titans fan? Did you ever grow up with Cyborg?
Not really. I would say that I had some exposure to Cyborg through marginal experiences. So through other more prominent characters and this character being a side character or part of, let's say, the Justice League, for instance.
Yeah.
I love Teen Titans Go. This is one of my favorite versions of Cyborg because he's just so witty and he's really resourceful. He's funny and he cares about the other characters. That's a really smart show, by the way. But this version of Cyborg, and I would probably say I've never met a cyborg that I didn't like.
This is true.
But in this, I think the first introduction of the cyborg was not necessarily positive for me. I felt that he was too young. I felt weird about his interaction and presence here. It didn't really move me in at first. By the end of this episode, I was definitely thinking differently about him, that I finally, it's like it penetrated my mind. I finally realized the importance of this character. But in the beginning, I felt like he was, for lack of a better explanation, just seemed very superficial. There was something just kind of
he's sort of
one-dimensional
stylish
about him.
Sort of stylish. He's got the hoodie, the tracksuits, and he's not
like a very CW character.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting that you say that you think he's too young in this incarnation, or you thought he was when you were first introduced to him. And he does have a very sort of rebellious teen quality. But if you remember, he was created basically as a member of the Teen Titans. So he was a teen along with Dick Grayson and the gang. But yeah, he was created by Marv Wolfman and George Perez in 1980. And his origin story is a little different in the comics, perhaps. His parents are characters who were, for lack of they were experimenting on their kid. So we've talked about this sort of thing, like experimenting on humans, both psychologically and, through vivisection and, et cetera. They were experimenting. They were both scientists who were experimenting on their child with a sort of an IQ serum, a treatment to make him smarter. Mm-hmm. And
so not necessarily a terrible thing.
Not a terrible thing, except they basically had a kid and just started experimenting on it.
I mean, they probably got IRB approval for that, depending on when it was. It the 60s?
No. He was created in 1980, so no. But yeah, it worked. I mean, he became a genius, but it was an explosion. Mm-hmm. Not really an explosion. When he first, the origin of his character is, and it kind of leads into what we're seeing here, which might be one of the reasons that they chose to bring Cyborg into Doom Patrol. His parents, I guess, got bored with IQ experiments and instead started experimenting with like interdimensional beings and portals and realms. And one day, Victor walks in and he suddenly is finding that a giant creature from another portal comes through into our dimension, kills his mom, basically destroys Victor, like rips him apart. And his dad sends the creature back to the dimension from whence it came, and then focuses all of his attention on rebuilding Victor with these cybernetic parts. Not so dissimilar from what we see as his origin in this episode. The gang all meet one another. They all learn that the donkey is a portal. They go into the portal and through its mouth and end up in this other dimension where Mr. Nobody is narrating everything for them. So he has become not just a narrator for us. They are breaking the fourth wall entirely and making him a narrator that is audible to these characters. And the characters that go into the portal are Cyborg, Rita, so Elasti-Woman, and
Larry,
Traynor, so Negative Man. And he gives each one, I would call it a test of sorts. It's his way of torturing them ultimately. He comes right out and says that they are escaping their torture.
It's like it's almost as if he wants to break them, or he wants to bring down, disarm them, bring down their defenses in very personal ways. He takes their historical trauma, he takes their ultimate fears and self-doubts, and he creates very different illusions for them, which feel very real. So it's almost like, I don't know, our VR would be our version of it, but their version in the supernatural world, in this interplanetary and interdimensional world, they go through these separate trials, these separate experiences.
What does he give to Rita?
So Rita finds herself on set. So she is the star of a romance movie, and the lighting is such, the set is such that it's clearly back in her time. I don't know when that would be, the 50s. But it's very, she's done up. She looks as if she is herself again. So there's almost this reconnection to herself as an actress, and everything is convincing. Yeah. And she ends up just folding into the scenery. She ends up acting in the film and taking part in the test. Yeah, we've got a little bit of audio here of Mr. Nobody, who is narrating her test or her torture, and we get her reaction. Let's take a listen here.
And action!
Like riding a bicycle, Rita knew how to hit her marks, find her light, sell the drama. This was it. This was her Oscar moment.
But I never had no mama, so I never knew that boys could be so mean, so cruel. And now this baby's gonna grow up not knowing her daddy.
In other words, Rita's an idiot.
And I see her daddy in her little eyes, and I resent her. Oh, I resent her sweet angel face.
I mean, she knows this is a trap, and still she plays along.
What else am I supposed to do?
So we hear that she's going along with it, and she asks, what else am I supposed to do? So she feels like it's real. She's cognizant of the fact that it isn't, but she's taking this as an opportunity to act again, to be the star again. And you hear her very defiantly saying, yeah, you're right. I am the star. Would you say that she passed this test, if it is a test?
I think they're all tests. I think that she misses it. I don't know if she passes it or fails it, but maybe she does fail it because in my mind, the point was to take her to a place of nostalgia and also create a sensation of sadness. I think that it's intended to make her feel disconnected again. It's intended to make her feel a realization that she doesn't have any part of that world anymore, because she has, like you said, she's cognizant of both things. The concept that she's convincingly acting in this scene, and that the other actors believe her. Yeah. And then also acknowledging, a higher level of connection, and that's Mr. Nobody. Yeah. And I think there's a part of it where there's like a baby carriage. Mm-hmm. Did you catch this?
Yes. Where everybody disappears from the set when the director calls cut, and she's no longer acting, which really seems to distress her. The idea that someone called cut, and everyone disappears from the set except for a baby carriage with a crying baby in the corner, and she slowly walks up to it as if trying to deny that there's something there in front of her. Mm-hmm. And we don't really get that. We're not told. That's the beauty of a serialized show. We are not told what that means exactly.
It's a bit open-ended, but I think that filling in the gaps here, I don't know if it's literal or symbolic, but there is a human connection. There's family that she doesn't have now. Yeah. Because she lives in Doom Manor by herself, or with this gang of other rejects.
But even when she's with them, she's by herself. Yeah, she's often kind of sewing. Isolated. She's watching her own movies.
She spends a lot of time on her own. And I wonder if that symbolizes that she is alone. Yeah. And that acting was for her a false feeling, that while she was acting, she could pretend that she had relationships and she had connections and that people cared about her. Mm-hmm. And even in episode 1, where she managed to have a positive relationship with a stranger in a cafe, in a diner, and they said she looked like this actress. Of course, they didn't know that she was that actress. Mm-hmm. And she wanted to know all about the feelings that this person had with that like parasocial relationship with her. Yeah. And also the story of that woman and her father. Yeah.
But she wasn't interested in the story about her father.
Not
she
as much.
Only wanted to know about sitting down with him to watch her movies. And she got very distressed. That's when she started to become gelatinous, and the oozing skin monster basically is when she learns that her father thought that Rita had done porn. Yeah. You know, like it suddenly the image that she thought she had constructed of herself, she's learning, had come tumbling down, when naturally all kinds of rumors are going to start about this woman who was on set one day and was beautiful and then was suddenly sludgy and then disappeared from Hollywood. People are going to come up with horrible, horrible stories. And she's now learning that this man not only thought she was doing porn, he told his daughter he had like a bag of it in his closet, and that distresses her.
Yeah, I think the sense that I got was this test had to do with the falsehood of who she was as an actor. Mm-hmm. And the reality, was she in a place where she could face the reality that she is no one, that she is a blob? Like she's not defined by anything, any characteristic aside from her acting persona. Yeah.
And we learn from Mr. Nobody through his narration that she's probably, and she kind of gives this look as if to acknowledge it, she's probably not that good an actress. He makes a comment about how this is her Oscar moment, and she goes into this melodramatic performance, and he just sort of jokes about it, where he's like, yeah, that's not
well. And that is her weakness. I think he's kind of an a-hole, and he knows she can hear that, right? So there's this, he is picking at each of them. This is his way of penetrating their sense of self, their consciousness, their their psychology and finding their weaknesses.
Yeah.
And so for her, it's a sense of her, who is her actual true self? When she's not a performer and she's not on stage or she's not on set, what does that leave? Who is that person? And the reality, which I think she finds frightening, is that she doesn't know. She doesn't really connect. It's like, it's nothing. It's nobody.
Do you think that the potential is there that the real person is the performer? Or do you think the person that she really is could be the person who simply performs in order to watch herself on screen? Like,
no, I think that's what gave her validation and that's what affirmed her. Mm-hmm. I don't know that it needs to be acting. I think that at least now she's looking for affirmation. She's looking for somebody to see her and hear her and acknowledge that she's valued.
Yeah.
And it was because she was an actor, that's where she got that attention.
And she feels like she's going to live forever on celluloid through these movies that she made. Like there's something, she'll always have a lasting presence, regardless of how good the quality of the project. Elasting. Oh. So let's talk about Larry Traynor. What was his distressing torture mechanism?
Well, I took issue with Larry's situation at first because the narrator is saying that he is this amazing pilot who lives this secretive life. And while I understand that being gay was frowned upon in that era and that he was preserving his safety, like he could not come out, that would have been detrimental for not only his profession, it would have been detrimental for the other guy. It would have been potentially risking his safety and his family, who I think he cared about.
Yeah.
But the narrator kind of set it up as if he was doing this horrible thing, living this secret life, was this transgression. It was this this sort of like dark thing that he was doing. And I didn't appreciate that because it's his lifestyle.
Well, and we see in the seat behind him, which didn't actually exist on the X-15, but there's a seat behind him that has his buddy, his lover, there. And I've got a tad bit of audio here, just a brief little clip. I'll play it for you.
Larry, when are you coming home? Boys miss their daddy.
I wasn't running away from my family.
Right! You were running from your family and your lover.
I'll have to be the one you choose. But you have to make a choice.
But you couldn't even do that, could you, Larry? Instead, you just stayed the course, and the suckers who loved you the most paid the price.
So he is haunted by both partners that he has behind him, talking about needing to choose between the two. He has suddenly put them in jeopardy because his plane is in a
his trial is literally piloting a plane that's on its way to destruction.
Spinning. Yeah, it's in a tailspin, and he is choosing not to grab the control stick. In fact, if you know the plane at all, his right hand is on the ejection.
I do not.
His right hand is on the ejection seat lever.
Okay.
So it's almost as if Larry is trying to decide whether he should eject from this plane, and instead he grabs the control stick to bring it out of its spin and save himself, save those loved ones that are also in the plane, and it's that part of him that can't not do it, even though, again, he is fully aware that this isn't real. Yeah.
It seemed as though this test was about a couple of things. One, is he brave? I'm using air quotes. Is he brave enough to live his authentic life? Is he courageous enough to choose his male lover because that's who he wants to be with?
I would argue that it's not even necessarily is he brave enough, and I'm using the air quotes now, to choose his male lover. Is he brave enough to choose either one of them? Is he brave?
To make a decision.
Yeah, is he brave enough to make that decision?
I think that's where I'm at too with like, is he, and the reason I'm using quotation marks is that the test puts him in a life or death situation. So it is creating a risk that requires courage beyond the psychology of this. It requires courage related to his safety, related to whether he will survive this plane crash if it crashes. If he ejects, I suppose that means that he doesn't choose. He doesn't have to make a decision. He escapes, he avoids. And I think that relates a lot to his situation now where he is like a mummy. He's wrapped in the gauze or whatever. And my sense is the wrappings keep other people from seeing his charred, burnt body, very deformed, very disfigured. I don't get the sense that the wrappings keep that alien energy inside of him. That alien energy can leave his body whenever it wants to.
Yeah.
So I have a feeling that is more to preserve his psychological safety. He doesn't want to be judged and ridiculed and seen as horrific. He doesn't want to be the monster that he feels he was inside because he was putting two people through something that he feels very guilty about.
Right.
And I think you're right. I think maybe I perseverated too much about this trying to, this trying to make him out to be a villain because of his lifestyle. Rather, maybe what he is guilty of is not being faithful to either person, not being honorable, not being loyal and honest to the people that care about him a lot. And then I would definitely say that's where he made mistakes.
Yes.
So as he is going through this trial and realizes that he has to make a decision or he will abandon this entirely, I think that's really related to his current situation where he's essentially in isolation. People don't see what he looks like.
Yeah.
He's very much a castaway. Like he sort of just lives off on his own. Again, like you said, even though he's in due manner with other people, he tends to his garden. He
and that's
kind
the
of
thing.
wanders.
That's the interesting thing is he went from one of, if not the, at the time, most exciting careers on the planet.
We did talk about that.
He's a jet. He's not just
who
a jet fighter
who would
pilot.
Be that? Who would who on this earth wants to be a test pilot?
People with that sense of risk taking, that sense of need to push the envelope. He was a test pilot. We're not just talking about like a fighter pilot. He wasn't just like over in combat. He was literally strapping himself to a plane that was designed to kill him if he couldn't control it. And so he was. I'm not suggesting that they designed it to kill him if he couldn't. But all of those experimental aircraft, the whole reason for testing them was to see if they were safe. And people died daily on those Air Force bases.
Oh my God.
And this man was one of those jockeys that pushed that envelope every single day or every time he went up into the air. He now tends his garden as his, relaxation time, or he avoids the risk. He is the one who says they're not ready to go back into town.
He's very reserved. He's not a risk taker anymore. Mm-hmm. There's an interesting montage in this episode where he attempts to leave town and he buys a bus ticket to like the next town over or whatever. And on his way,
not even the next town over, he wants to go far away. He wants to leave.
Well, on his way, he buys the ticket and waits for the bus. And when he tries to step onto the bus, this alien energy escapes his body, leaves his body completely motionless. I realize that he needs the energy source to animate his body.
Correct. He is dead otherwise.
And yet his thoughts are his own. His body is his own. Mm-hmm. He has control of his body. Mm-hmm. but he needs this alien energy for it to be alive.
Yeah, and it gets to choose when it leaves. There is
Right.
no, he mentions later on in the episode, we need ground rules. He writes a note and leaves it on the mirror and says, we need to have some ground rules. That he's telling the energy, because when he goes to, we'll call it sleep, he goes to his bed and he lays down and he repeats to himself, you're going to wake up. You're going to wake up, and he closes his eyes and the energy comes out of him. So that he is essentially dead on that bed.
Right.
And the energy being goes over to the mirror, looks at the piece of paper, and it says, we need some ground rules. And so you realize that he is hostage to this energy. He tries to get on that bus 20 times, and every single time he gets a new ticket. Every single time he gets up to go onto that bus, the energy leaves his body and he misses it because he's a dead man on the ground. And
so the energy wants him to stay in this town.
Yeah, the energy proves to be, and I don't want to jump ahead too far just yet because I want to come back to this, but the energy proves to be not just a puckish being that lives inside of him. It almost is a conscience of sorts. It is the one that prevents him from leaving, not because the energy necessarily doesn't want to leave Doom Manor, but because Larry knows good and well he needs to be there. Mm-hmm. And he needs to be there with those people. And I think the energy is basically telling him the same thing. I am not letting you leave town because you can't escape that easily. And so, and then we are revisited by, well, let's just say the energy takes a more important role in his test a little bit later in the episode. But let's talk about Cyborg. What is his traumatic event? And I think it's interesting before we talk about this, it's the one event that is the most on the surface traumatic.
Right.
Because he's taunting Rita with acting. He's taunting Larry with the idea of going back to being a fighter jockey, and that exhilaration of...
He doesn't put Cyborg in a superhero...
Yeah. It's not a pleasant...
combative... it's not like he's saving people or having to make a decision or like you have a choice of who to rescue. Mm-hmm. And it's actually not even the blast. It's not the trauma itself, because Cyborg was caught in a lab explosion that killed his mother, and he takes credit for it. He says, he feels responsible. I'm to blame. Yeah. And rather than have him go through the explosion, which I think would be at surface level pretty traumatic to relive, he wakes up in this trial, in this test. He wakes up after the explosion occurred, so he's sprawled on the ground outside of what I think is his home. Yes, and his mother's body is burning, a couple yards away.
Yeah, burning next to him.
It's pretty grotesque because
he's lost his leg.
Yeah, his body is
off.
completely disfigured. His eye has been
gone.
Yeah, I'm trying to word this carefully, but
there's a hole.
I think the depiction is really graphic, but it's not gratuitous. It's not too offensive and gross. There's almost a sense of really capturing and telling us how jarring and horrific his physical and psychological trauma was. And what's interesting is that this trial was having him relive not the experience of the explosion, but the aftermath of the trauma, which, as we've talked about before, the aftermath of the trauma, our interpretation, our perspectives, the way that we initially perceive anything horrible that happens is what guides our recovery.
Yeah. Would you suggest that, or is it possible, can I posit that the trauma was not the explosion, but the seeing his mother on fire a few yards
Yeah.
away.
I mean, the entirety, there's a collection, I
Right.
would say there's a collection of horrible things that he experienced.
Yeah.
And the explosion itself, if this were some kind of therapeutic relationship, I would call it the explosion. That is the trauma.
Okay.
But yes, you're absolutely right. It has elements of traumatic experiences. What it was like to be, I'm going to get really detailed with this, what it was like to be thrown out of the lab because of the force, the brutality of the explosion. That was painful. Or maybe he lost consciousness, and so that was alarming in some way.
Yeah,
right?
I was going to say, it's possible that the reason you don't see it is because that's not in his like
He doesn't have it in his memory.
No one thinks about the explosion. They always think about what's after. So
That's not always true, but in this case, you're right. I think there's maybe either a lapse of memory, or because of the blow to his body and maybe his brain, he has no memory of it. But I think you're right in that the trauma itself is the loss of his mother, seeing his mother's body burning. So the disfigurement and the horror of seeing that happen to her body, the horror of looking down and seeing part of his leg gone, not being able to see out of one eye, realizing half of his face is blown off.
Yeah.
Now, this is similar to people who've woken up after an IED explosion or some kind of combat situation where that's the last thing they remember.
Yeah.
And they do have memory of waking up to some kind of horrific thing like this.
Now, this is what I find interesting, and it's the thing that is the most torturous from Mr. Nobody is in this moment, Cyborg takes control. He makes it clear that this is not nearly the worst that you could do to me because, well, I've got the audio. Let's take a listen.
And how do you call yourself a hero when your mother died in a lab accident you caused?
You don't get it. You think forcing me to relive this is torture? I relive this every time I go to sleep. I relive this when I close my eyes. You may know who I am, but you don't know shit about me. If you did, you would know that every criminal I bust and every person I save is me fulfilling a pledge to my mom that she'll never get to hear. Trying to make her proud. Knowing I'm the reason she's not around to see it. That's my burden. That's what it means to be Cyborg.
What an origin story. Wow! Too bad it's a load of donkey shit.
He takes control in that moment. But the really crazy thing is, this isn't his traumatic event. His traumatic event was not the explosion, was not his mother, because he can handle that. The traumatic event was being on the table and his father building him into Cyborg. He goes ballistic in that moment as his father rips off what's left of his arm and starts to replace it with metallic.
And that is all, some of that is not what happened. There is the way that his father treats him in that operation. It seems kind of exaggerated.
We don't know.
He's very
well, he takes on the voice.
Empathy.
Yeah, he takes on the voice of Mr. Nobody. It's clearly he is the conduit through which Mr. Nobody is treating Cyborg in this.
That's what Mr. Nobody is doing to him. My sense is that Cyborg was put under.
Potentially, yeah, but Mr. Nobody is letting him know that I'm fully cognizant of the fact that you becoming Cyborg is actually your trauma. You hate being this person. So he's actually very good at his job.
Yeah.
As being an
evil person.
The torturous.
Well, and I don't disagree with that because, and it's not that the loss of his mother and his disfigurement, that the accident overall wasn't traumatic, but that the collection of events represents something that is symbolically traumatic. The loss of his sense of personhood, like who he believed he was, completely changed once he becomes the cybernetic figure. And the narrator even says, you don't even have memories. You have programs that represent memories. So your memories aren't even yours. They don't belong to you. And that I think there's this pretty deeply felt fear that I experienced there. Like, by telling somebody, you don't really, you died. You are now parts and pieces that are put together by this, cybernetic technology, and you're operated through programming. And so you don't even have ownership over your feelings, your thoughts, your movements. And that loss of the self is traumatic. He
puts himself into privacy mode so that his father can't invade, his computer, his internal head. He doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know any of that. And later, after they escape the portal and end up back in Doom Manor, his father shows up and he's like, well, I guess privacy mode doesn't mean anything. He's like, well, when you leave the Earth, I get a notification. Yeah. But as he's yelling at him, telling him that he wants him to come back home, he needs him to come back to Detroit, Vic ends up saying,
I'll check in on schedule. Don't worry about me.
I always do.
Why? I'm Cyborg. Right?
When talking to his father, he alludes to himself as this machine that you don't have to worry about because I can take care of myself.
Right. I'm no longer this, like, as a human, as Vic, I was vulnerable and I had weaknesses and I could even die. And as Cyborg, I'm sure you could just reprogram me. There's this defensiveness.
You can always rebuild me.
Yeah. I don't think, going back to the clip you played, I was moved by that because I don't think that's untrue. While on the one hand, I understand that he sees himself differently and he has to grapple with the knowledge that he is a cybernetic machine and he had to change the concept of who he was. I also absolutely believe him when he says, showing him his trauma, the loss of his mother, the accident, and even the transformation, like showing him, I believe him when he says, you can't get to me this way because I'm already reliving this. I've not let this go. Yeah. This is still programmed. These memories exist in my memory bank and forms who I am. And I believe that because it relates directly to his sense of honor, his wanting to protect people, his belief, his conviction that he is a hero, and that what he went through was formative for him. That and we've talked about how to process and understand trauma. He has to give meaning to this horrible accident. He has to give some kind of connection. There has to be connective tissue to what happened to him and who he is now and what value he has as a cybernetic machine. Yeah. And he's able to make that connection. This was not for nothing. I'm able to find purpose. Yeah. And what I got from that is that by having me relive this horrible thing, you're not going to take away my purpose.
Right. Right. So they all end up getting out. And how do they get out? The energy being comes out of Larry, and as if to suggest that it was something that wasn't even necessarily planned for. The energy being understands that if I don't play this game, Larry might, but if I don't play this game, then we can get out of here. And the energy being comes out of his body, effectively making Larry dead. And Mr. Nobody acknowledges, okay, you guys you're going to get out now because this is all going to break down. He alludes to the idea that their torture is ending earlier than anticipated. And the donkey not only spits them back out, he spits the entire town back out. So the whole thing is no longer, the town is back to normal. All 8,000 and some odd people from town come back, and the donkey explodes. As all of this is happening, we go back to that father-daughter figure, or that father-daughter relationship of Robot Man and Crazy Jane. Jane is a Robot Man discovers through old videotapes that the chief was recording while doing his sort of therapy with Jane, that her system in her body is known as the underground. It's where all 64 different personalities dwell. And he asks her to draw a map of the underground, and we see just how vast a system this is of the different characters, and which ones are good and which ones are volatile and which ones are somewhere in between, and who's connected to whom, and all of it. It is it's a crazy amount of information that has been culled over the course of these sessions. And Robot Man is just now getting the full breadth of this. But in doing so, he learns about the underground, and he uses that information with some of the characters who are a bit more aggressive and volatile toward him, don't care for him at all, nearly kill him with words that have formed in the air and turned into blades. I mean, some of these powers are really cool. Yeah. Especially visually, if you're talking about a TV show, really, really cool to be able to put onto screen. And we see that he continues, he does not give up on Jane. He tries to, again, he's using her as a surrogate for his daughter. He makes her peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, but cuts them into triangles for them, and it turns out some of them are allergic to nuts, and
that was hilarious.
Well,
so
I've got this piece of audio. Let me play it for you.
How special. Crustless PB&J triangles.
Oh, wow, thanks. Too bad 3 of us are gluten-free, 12 of us are allergic to peanut butter, and none of us are your fucking daughter!
Ouch.
That was hard. I think there's moments where I want them to connect more, and I see the potential for them to find healing among each other. Not in an unhealthy way, because that could be really psychologically detrimental as far as not having maybe a more like realistic supportive relationship. So his defenses have a lot to do with his self-doubt and his inability to see himself as an effective parent. Like he already feels like he's a failure, and being in the robot body makes him even more self-doubting and actually pretty self-hating.
Even when making those sandwiches, his body, he's so strong.
Like he messes up.
He's cutting the sandwiches into the triangles, and he crushes the plate underneath. It shatters.
Well, and I get the sense that he is turning toward the strategies and the different interactions and behaviors he believes will draw them closer. I don't think he's trying to reenact something with his daughter. I think he is trying to authentically console her and think of ways to connect with her. Now, the other members of the household have given up on her, not to the degree that they don't care about her, but
well, they've given up on themselves. Just they can't care about her. They
stick her in this isolation room, and they essentially keep her there until she can settle down. And what's interesting is that the majority of her personalities have a hard time interacting with anybody.
Yeah.
There isn't even Jane Prime, or the prominent persona, is rough around the edges, and is somewhat volatile, defensive, has difficulty tolerating distress. As soon as she feels something heavy, she snaps into another character, another persona.
Yeah. And some of these personas might be made of pure fire. I mean,
cool.
we see that some of them are basically the Human Torch.
And some of this is very accurate toward theories around DID. DID, previously known as multiple personality disorder, is where someone's able to endorse having, so this is all self-reported, they endorse having at least 2 or more distinct personality identities, and each of those identities truly have a unique name, a personal history, individual characteristics, sometimes different genders, different ages,
different powers.
Different powers in this case, different accents, different nationalities. And I know on the show we've talked about the challenges, the difficulty with really understanding this disorder because, for one, it's very rare. And second, it's difficult to measure and capture the existence of the different personalities. And it's been proposed that a person who presents this way with seemingly different personalities may likely have some other memory disorder or traumatic disorder where having or presenting themselves and kind of affecting these different personas is one strategy, one way where they feel like they can be themselves, strangely enough, as paradoxical as that sounds.
Yeah.
What that means, and I'm not saying that people are faking this. There are some people that fake this, BTW. There are people that fake this, just like there are people that fake other disorders. But I also believe that there are people that truly have the experience of the different personalities, but their personalities are better explained and sort of better defined as dissociations of the self and different memory lapses and I think even sometimes some the person's conviction that this is who they have to be in order to understand the different parts of themselves. But the reality is that typically the person is experiencing a very fragmented sense of self.
Yeah.
And as we talked about, if there is a traumatic event that one of the personas, maybe the original persona, experienced, that person needs to be protected. That person needs to be away from the triggers and the harms and the harm and the possibility of being further traumatized. And so other characters become more prominent and active in protection.
So it's possible that someone with DID had a trauma, needed to protect themselves in a way that they didn't feel like they could do. And so they created a persona that could do it, even though it's still them. They created a persona that they thought could do it. And it's psychosomatic in that they fully believe that this is a different person, a different character. And it gets to a point where there's lost time, even though there isn't. There's lost time because, no, I have spent all this time as Charlie instead of Sam. And I have spent all this time as Deborah instead of Becky and, whatever. So you're suggesting, you're not just you, but a popular hypothesis is that the person is genuinely experiencing these things, but that they aren't actually separate entities within the same person.
Right. And a lot of psychiatrists and psychologists believe that it's impossible to have distinct personalities in this way, that in fact it is one personality that's found a way to present itself differently. Again, usually through some kind of neurobiological reason.
Yeah.
And sometimes a neurobiological deficit, maybe head trauma, maybe some kind of insult to the brain, which causes some disconnections between the systems.
Yeah.
And I would probably agree that this is, I'm not talking about Jane right now, but in general, that DID is usually better explained as an offshoot of another psychiatric problem. So namely things like borderline personality disorder, or generally a profound difficulty in coping with stress that someone might be experiencing. But I think what's also interesting is that there are, in the last episode, we talked about amnesia a little bit. And there is a type of amnesia called dissociative amnesia, where there's this fugue, there's this almost separation, this depersonalization from the self that happens with these lapses of memories. And then the person kind of fills those gaps with these other personalities to make the most sense of like, where did all this time go?
Right.
So, again, really difficult to tease apart. But what I like about Jane is that she is, in my mind, representing what that textbook DID presentation would be. Not so much, well, certainly with the different personalities and with their distinct powers, but also because she actually has some of the mood symptoms that come along with that. The sort of I'm showing my hands like way up in the air, like the
like you just don't care.
Yeah, I know. I care.
Oh,
the increased energy, the feelings of irritability and anger, so some of the more expressive emotions, and then the mood states that are depressed, the mood states that are down and isolating. And I think that we certainly see her experience the aftermath, the impact of having these different personalities affect her. She is exhausted, she's stressed, and she's tired. And that, I think, is showing us what her psychology is really about.
Yeah. I feel like there's so much more to talk about, and we're only in the second episode. I'm loving this series, especially in the second rewatch. Folks need to come back and take a listen to episode 3 in 2 weeks. Until then, Drea, why don't you tell them where they can find you?
I'm on Twitter at Arkham Asylum Doc, on Instagram, Arkham Asylum Doc, and on LinkedIn, Andrea Letamendi.
You can find me on Twitter. I am at bward028. You can find me on Instagram at b_ward028. You can find us both on Twitter and on Instagram at Arkham Sessions. Of course, you can email us your questions, your thoughts. We would love to hear them. We'd love to address them on the show. That is arkhamsessions@gmail.com. And be sure to follow our family over at Fanbase Press for their podcasts, their news, their comics, and all their good stuff.
And if you'd like to read my articles about the psychology of other characters like Maleficent, Elsa, and Star Wars characters, hop on over to fandom.com and you'll find a bunch of my pieces over there.
Yeah, they've been some fantastic work, Drea.
Thank you.
And until next time, I'm Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Andrea Letamendi.
And together we are
the Arkham Sessions.
I should be drinking for this.